let's jump in. As we know, since we're all citizen foresters and we've all gone through the training, the focus of the program still with this training is the same. We are still developing that urban tree inventory and trying to increase community support for our urban trees. So this is just another step of us doing that. When we talk about collecting information for the inventory, we're collecting trees to, yes, see where they're located, which ones need attention. But this part of what we're doing, this activity, is really seeing where trees are needed. When going through the inventory and seeing where trees are, and now seeing where the empty spaces are where trees can go, we're to be able to take that information to one more step to getting trees into the ground. And of course, still what those trees provide. So before I hop into more of the specifics of what we're doing, I'd like to give you a little bit of a background to why we are taking this next step. So Francisco, since you are more connected with Trees for Kaimuki and all the new opportunities that we have going on that kind of opened up this door for this training, would you be able to share a little bit of how this opportunity came up and why now we're taking this time to get back into Kaimuki and looking for trees or places where trees can be planted?
Yeah, so I'm with Trees for Kaimuki, and which has several groups attached to it. Envision Kaimuki, which is attached to Kaimuki Neighborhood Board, the Park Service, Trees for Honolulu's Future, and of course Smart Trees. And so we talk with various people inside and outside of city government to advocate for trees in Kaimuki. And the heroes of this story is Tommy Waters, who is the city council chair, and part of his district covers Kaimuki. Also, the Division of Urban Forestry of the City Department of Parks and Recreation, which is called, usually called DUF. And, Morgan had a interesting webinar with DUF folks a few weeks ago. And if you haven't seen that, you should check it out. Very interesting. And of course, Daniel Donnell, who is the president of Trees for Honolulu's Future, which is, again, one of the partners for Trees for Kaimuki. And he is kind of working with all these parties. So this is a story. It's a reductive story, but I think it gets us to where we are now. So Council Chair Waters put money in the city budget for Kaimuki trees. And our organization, Trees for Kaimuki, would like to present to DUF a plan about where to plant trees and what trees to plant. And so having a plan would help figure out the funding better, including maintenance costs. So we have already mapped about 130 potential tree planting sites in Kaimuki, mostly in the area bordered by Waialae Avenue, 12th Avenue, Alohea Avenue, and 6th Avenue. And our current goal is to map 500 sites and present that to DUF. This model about adopting trees means, talking to residents, getting them to adopt the city tree that would be planted in front of their homes and to take care of the tree, right? So, your role in identifying tree planting sites, that's not the only role, right? Our role as citizen foresters is to advocate for trees with our neighbors. So I think we should always remember that.
Awesome stuff. So true, Francisco. Thank you. Awesome. So let's do a little bit of background for why, again, we are planting these potential planting sites, kind of going on to what Francisco had said. So you may remember the 2016 Urban Canopy Assessment was the research that was done to see where our canopy is, where there's areas for improvement. So that showed there was about 64% of urban land that could be modified to hold more canopy coverage. However, in Kaimuki, there was only about 37% area of possibility for improved growth. So overall, compared to the island, it's quite a significant amount less. But those opportunities for improvement, there's even more of an urgency to get those areas taken advantage of before they become hard surfaces. So we're talking about available green spaces for planting versus available hard spaces that aren't going to be suitable for growing our urban canopy coverage. So the more we urbanize, the more difficult it's going to be, which is something that we're seeing in Kaimuki, but there is still space. So Francisca had mentioned DUF, the Division of Urban Forestry, is the agency that's responsible for planting trees within our public areas, our city right-of-ways, and our parks. And this includes all of the areas that we currently map trees, where we find them in unimproved sidewalks, planting strips, medians, and parks. So any of those trees or spaces within that right-of-way area that's considered public is what the city and county with DUF manages. So they do have lots of roles and responsibilities that they kind of went into in that other webinar. If you were able to catch that, there is so much that goes into planting and caring and managing those trees. They do have an awesome team that helps support that with performing maintenance or removals and planting trees. They do have a landscape and nursery that grows the trees and plants them throughout the state. So for getting trees in the ground, there has to be certain criteria, right? Because we're looking at public areas, there's liability concerns, only so many amount of resources that the city will have to take care of these trees. So for trees to get into the ground, they have to meet these specific guidelines. DUF is ultimately going to be the people that are going to determine if and when trees are going to be able to get into the ground. While property owners can request for trees to be planted in front of their space, it is illegal, though, to plant trees in that area. And there is plenty of opportunity to be planting trees in other residential and private areas too. So you can request for trees, but they don't prefer not to have that be done on your own accord. So they're working towards growing that canopy coverage either way, just in a sustainable way. So, but we have a role to play in that, so we can help spread those resources as far as we can. So in part of that process, what we're doing with the program, we're creating the tree inventory. Next is to map these potential planting sites. Once DUF approves that, then we can find tree adoptees to be able to take care of those trees and help DUF manage those trees. So with the Citizen Forester program, as we all been involved with it thus far, we go out, we're looking for trees. So now we're trying to shift our perspective to see where trees can go. So these are just some Google images of looking to see, usually when we are planning out our mapping sites, we're looking to see where all of these trees are in that city right of way. Now we're going to be looking for empty spaces where trees might be able to be put into the ground. So to recap the training components for today, we're going to be determining what qualifies for a potential planting site, the criteria that's needed for that, how to actually map the site. So when we're out in the field, what is it actually that we're doing? And then what do we do with the data? All right, so let's get into those evaluations for looking to see what those sites can be. So there's a couple of questions to ask when we're approaching a site. And if you have that guide that I had thrown into the chat when we had first started, that will kind of summarize those questions that we want to be asking when we're coming up to a site. So mainly we're looking to see if that new tree is going to come into conflict with any of its surroundings. Is that new tree going to have space to grow? And what factors are there that will determine an appropriate tree species? So this doesn't necessarily come into our play so much, since DOF would be the people that would be determining what species, but we're looking, you know, is there adequate water? What's the soil type? Is there even just space for the tree to grow? Other factors that as citizen foresters, we have some background knowledge to be able to determine if it's a good site or not. So this is an image from DUF. It's also in that guide of what we're looking for when trying to find a site for a tree. So here we have enough space for the tree to grow. Yes, this is the city right of way, so there's a lot of other utilities over here too, but we're making sure that these utilities are not going to come into conflict with the growth space of the tree. So utilities can be present, but as long as they're not in conflict, they're okay. So two of the main criteria we're looking for, again, are growth space and location. So we're going to break that down a little bit more. When I say growth space, what kind of space are we talking about? And what is it actually that the tree needs? And then for location, we want to make sure that these trees are in the city right of way, they're in front of a single property, and that there's space for the infrastructure that's currently present. Okay, so for space to grow, we are looking for, one of the first criteria that we're looking for is that the mature trees are going to have at least 10 feet of clearance for any utility. So any of these utilities that we come across, like a fire hydrant, existing poles or streetlights, or even existing trees, these are all things that are going to want to be considered, that when the tree grows to its mature size, that there's still going to be 10 feet of clearance, especially for something like wires that we're already collecting data on. You remember when we are collecting data on wire conflict, any wires that are within that 10 feet of the tree, we consider them to be within conflict. So those trees are obviously planted before, but we want to make sure that the trees that are going to be planted are going to be in the ideal space. Let's see, can you guys see your question? Are there setback requirements from roadways? Example, liability. Feel free to unmute. Do you mean like, are there?
So specifically, I'm wondering, because with our plantings within that right of way, there were certain setbacks we had to have from the road depending on the speed of the traffic on the road, because the county was concerned about people losing control, hitting a tree and hurting or killing themselves. And then suing the county.
Yeah, sure. So I think from like, there are requirements for intersections, but for the setback of how far the trees are from the curb, I don't think that that is considered. So it's more intersections that there is a setback.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Good question. Okay, so another criteria is that there is a zero conflict zone. So in addition to that 10 feet of clearance, we're looking to make sure that there's nothing in the way that's going to obstruct that tree growth. So there has to be distance from an existing tree, existing infrastructure, and existing landscape. So all of these specification numbers are in that guide for looking for an existing tree, but existing infrastructure, we're not going to plant a tree underneath an overhang. So this picture on the top right here, we're looking at a space in front of a store that has like an awning. We're not going to plant something that's going to eventually crash into the top of it or create more damage. And as we know, trees don't grow super well in competition with each other. So making sure that there's enough space for trees to grow, that they're going to be able to be sustained there for a long time. Next is that it needs to be grown in a permeable surface. So like I had mentioned with that tree canopy assessment, permeable surface is that area where water and nutrients can be absorbed through the surface. So when we talk about hard surfaces, things like concrete or buildings, things are obviously not going to be able to grow there. So we're looking for areas that are permeable that trees can grow, obviously, so they can get the nutrients that they need. So things like asphalt, concrete, pavers are not going to work for areas for trees to grow in. And the more we urbanize, unfortunately, the more that we're seeing those impermeable surfaces. So we got to catch them when we can. Okay, so next up, we're moving into location. So for DUF to be planting trees, it needs to be within their area of jurisdiction. So trees need to be planted within that city right-of-way or within a city park. So right now, when we're going out inventorying trees, our team leaders have a Schedule A, which is where they already know that there are trees that are located, but it also includes like the parks that they manage too. So we have an idea of what parks that they're considering or that are underneath their management. So that's considered the right-of-way, is that setback or easement, where we're already finding those public trees in neighborhood areas. The area, like the distance or area of the city right-of-way depends not only on the area, but even the areas within the neighborhood. So it's not a set number of, oh, this is 10 feet from the middle of the road, so this is part of the city right-of-way. The easements are specific to certain areas, and without an actual survey, it's hard to tell. So like we do when we're doing our citizen forester inventory, we kind of look for other signs of other utilities that the city has in their right-of-way too. So like wires, we're also looking for the water utilities or the communication boxes, some things along the strip of property where the city would have other types of utilities that they would be responsible for also. So that area does vary from area to area. Also fences, where people have their fence built up to the area beyond the fence to the road, is usually the city right away also. Okay, next for location is adjacent to a single property. So what we mean by that is that the tree needs to be in front of a single address, which is something that also we collect during our inventory. And this is really so there's no conflict with neighbors if there's ever an issue with the tree and who takes care of them. So while DUF does plant trees in the city right of way, the homeowner is responsible for just basic maintenance. So they're not responsible for maintaining the tree, but just keeping the area tidy. So as you can imagine, I'm sure you've all heard stories that people who have a tree that's growing into their neighbor's yard and causing a mess. So this is something that the city wants to avoid, since it is part of their partly involved with being the ownership of this tree. So when trees need to be planted, it needs to be clearly within the area of a single home. So not in that area in between. You can see kind of this red line, that area between property A and B is not a space where we would want to plant a tree, because there can be some discrepancy between who the caretaker would be. Okay, and so next up allows for infrastructure. So this is kind of like what Kanyuku was saying a little bit about the setback, in a sense, where this is kind of where we consider intersections already other types of infrastructure that we need to have visible for drivers and for just general safety in these public areas. So it needs to be out of line of sight of crosswalks, so people can see people crossing the street. Needs to be a certain distance from driveways, so people pulling back, have enough visibility to see oncoming traffic, and same with streetlights and street signs. So the distance, again, for each of these pieces of infrastructure in our communities have a specific setback measurement that we need to abide by. So that middle of the intersection, distance from a street sign, those are all in that cheat sheet that are specific for each utility or for infrastructure. Okay, so back to our checklist. These are the three main questions that we're going to be asking when looking for if the space that we're looking at is eligible for trees to grow in. So is a tree at least 10 feet, have at least 10 feet of clearance from any of the utilities that are nearby? Are there any conflicts with any of the existing landscape, trees, or infrastructure? And is the surface permeable? So are the trees going to even be able to get the resources that they need to grow in a natural setting? So if all of this is good, then we can move on to our location checklist. If any of these answers are no, then this is not going to be a site for a potential planting. And so for our location checklist, is the site within the city right of way or park adjacent to a single property? And does it allow area for this necessary infrastructure? And if all of these are good, then we're good to go to consider this as a potential site for planting. And so then we need to map it. Again, if any of these points here, these questions don't meet their criteria, then this is not going to be able to be considered as a planting site. So then we can kind of move on to seeing where else that we can find those areas. So, and so if we do find a site that does meet all of those criteria, does that mean that there is going to be a tree planted there? Not necessarily. There are many other factors that, oh, there's a typo in there. There's many other factors that DUF has to consider when planting a tree. So, and some of these things that we're not able to identify as citizen foresters looking through sites, we do the best that we can, but there are always going to be outside factors, and DUF is going to be the determining party to see if the site really is eligible for planting. So some of the other considerations that they would be looking at would be if there's remaining tree stumps that can be costly or too difficult to remove. The types of planter areas, I'm sure you have all seen those areas that are half covered in concrete or maybe just not suitable for trees. It might not be an area that would be ideal for planting. Any type of growth space concerns, traffic concerns, issues with the site condition that changes or something that we didn't notice. And then above ground and underground utilities. Underground utilities are a big one because we don't know all the time of what is going to be in the surrounding areas, but we'll do our best to try and see and be observant for what is out there when we're looking at these sites. But all in all, the information that we are collecting is going to be helpful for them to even filter out where from these sites that we have presented to them are going to be eligible for potential plantings as it is. So it's definitely a start. So when we're out mapping these areas, we do use equipment similar to the ones that we do when we're doing our tree inventory. We'll still wear citizen forester shirts for visibility. We'll have clipboards, our 100-foot tape, rangefinder, and handouts just for outreach if people ask what we're doing. And then a device with data capability. So this is for tree plotter, which is going to be the majority of what we're using when we're out in the field doing this activity. And we do use it the same type of way. There are just a few different routes, I guess, within tree plotter that we would be taking, other different fields or layers that we would be in opposed to our general tree mapping inventory. But all in all, it is the same resource. So when we're collecting data for mapping these potential planting sites, we want to know the GPS location. We want to know exactly where this site is. And now I think when we did this training last year, we didn't have the exact coordinates. This time around we do. So that will be something that will be added in when we're collecting the GPS location. Next, we're going to be taking photos of the site. About my dog in the background. Fortunately, I can't mute myself, so hopefully you can hear me. If not, I'll try to speak up. Yeah, so photos are going to be a huge component part of the information that we're collecting here. So we're going to be able to see exactly what the site is and what nearby conflicts may be around. So when we're taking these pictures, we want to show at least 25 feet on each side of the area that we're considering, so you can get a full view of what's nearby without having to actually go back into the field and see what's there in real life. And so location information. Location information is in that location information tab. When we do our location information, how many times can I say information? Location information data collection for trees that we're out mapping. These are the same components that we're collecting for this. We're looking at the growth space, the location in front of the property of the address that is related to the area. So that right, left, front, or back details, any nearby utilities, which would be the wire conflict or just presence. And then, but we're also collecting the site width and the location status, which we'll get into in a minute. And then yes, more information about utility presence. We want to see, make sure that there's at least that 10 feet of clearance. And then if there's any considerations between that, there is a space there for comments that you can put into Tree Plotter as well. So let's break this down a little bit more. So when we log into Tree Plotter, do it the same way pretty much. You're going to log in with your username, select the organization, since we're going to be working in Kaimuki with this activity. We'll make sure that everybody has access to the Kaimuki organization. So you would load those trees and then find your location, which on this image here would be the 4th button down. If you have your location settings set up, it will point you right to exactly where you are. And then you would go to the 4 lines up in the top right to add a tree. So usually when we do this, we select the tree template, and the templates are set up to auto-populate any kind of basic information that we need to have for what we're putting in. So trees are going to be a little bit different than potential planting sites. You may have seen those when that little pop-up comes up. So instead of tree, we're going to be clicking potential proposed planting site. And then next we're going to take pictures of the site, and that gets uploaded same place that you would upload pictures of trees at the bottom of the tree details tab. So if you scroll all the way down, you'll see photos, and then you can take pictures from your phone and then upload them, or you can take them directly through the app. Okay, so then next up we need the site size. So we're going to be taking measurements and the width and length of the site. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a square site. We don't want it smaller than a square. Longer length is fine, but the width needs to be at least 3 feet wide, which would be considered a small site. 4 is medium and 5 is large. Have to double check to see if we're still considering small, medium, and large sites. But we'll pull up Tree Plotter in a minute and see if that's, I believe it still is an option, but we're really collecting the information. The numeric values of the site is what's going to be important. And this is what we're going to do with the 100-foot tape. We also have the option to pace. So our team leaders do have the 100-foot tape to be able to take these measurements, but with working with a group and it's just another option similar to how we do our tree inventory too. If you don't have a 100-foot tape, you could always pace to see what the site measurements are. Okay, so location status. Oh, this is where that comes in. So the location status is one of those details that auto-populates when you select the proposed planting site template when you're first adding your tree or your potential planting site. So in that location tab, this is something that we had added recently to be able to track those other just external features of our inventory, being these proposed planting sites, and also recording where we have gone to streets that don't have trees. So in this case, we would just select with one of those proposed planting sites, if it's a small, medium, or large site, under location status. And then underneath there is where we would select the site size as well. And then you just input the measurements that we're taking. And then land use, still all within that location information tab, same as before. We're looking to see, is this area in a single family, multifamily, commercial area, or in a park? And then just some information. This is going to be like directions, think of it like that, regarding the front of the property. So like we do with our tree inventory, we're looking to describe the location of the site from the address perspective. I'm sorry, no, from the maintenance worker's perspective, not from the homeowner. So from standing from the front of the property, looking into the property, we want to see, is it in the front of the property, behind the property? This more so goes to the right or left. So if you're standing from the street and the site is off to the right side of the property, from the street's perspective, that is, you consider it the right, opposed to the left if you were standing from the house.
Question.
Yes.
On corner lots.
Yes.
For other things that I've worked with, whichever side is facing the road is the front. So corner lots have two fronts. Is that how we're looking at this as well?
That's a great question, and has been definitely, I think, cause for some hair pulling with our citizen foresters for a while. That's this graphic is actually not our most recent options for location on site. We have added a corner option. So when we are finding those areas on corner properties, it's just easier to describe it as a corner to kind of save some frustration of if it's on the side or the front or whatnot. So yeah, that's not seen here, but if you go into Tree Flyer, I'll pull that up in a minute and can see where that is. But great question. Okay, and finally, the last thing that we want to record for location information is a growth space. So same thing, we're looking to see, really, is it a tree well, an unimproved sidewalk, a planting strip, is that a park, if it's in bare soil or sand, things like that. So just a little refresher of what each of those areas are. The median is an option. This top picture here doesn't really show super great, but we all know what a median is, that area, that green space area in the middle of a street. Oftentimes we don't inventory trees within a median, but if it's safe to do so, that could be a good option to describe the location of that tree. Planting strips are the area of green that are in between a paved sidewalk and the road. So if it is paved and there's some grass there, it's going to be a planting strip. If it's just grass and no paved sidewalk, that would be considered an unimproved sidewalk. So there's a little bit of a difference there. Just kind of describing, is there concrete or is there more green space is really the difference between the planting strip and an unimproved sidewalk. Tree wells are those little squares that are intentionally placed within sidewalks for trees to grow. And then parks or bare soil is going to be obviously at a park that has a lot of space and free range for trees to grow. Okay, and one more, the recording the presence of utilities is going to be the same option that we're doing for trees, whether there's lines present with no conflicts, or they are conflicting, or if there's no lines at all. Okay, so let's run through a couple of practice scenarios. Okay, so we come up to the site and there's a lot of things going on here. So feel free to unmute and kind of see or call out things that you would consider when we are looking to see if this is a suitable site. So what kind of things are standing out to you guys?
So is this a dead tree? Or just a tree without leaves that we're looking at?
This is just a tree that's present. So remember, with what we're doing now, we're kind of shifting our perspective from looking for where trees are to seeing where trees could be. So for this scenario, we're looking at this unimproved sidewalk here and where space could be for trees. So I'm thinking if we approach this spot, we're not looking at this particular tree. It's definitely not looking great. It does look like there's some leaves on here. Just for in general, tree enthusiasts, I do think it's alive, but it's not really so much of the concern of the information that we're trying to collect here. I think we're looking more so at this site, this little brown space, where a tree potentially could be growing.
So I would say it's kind of like a minimum site for it, not the best site for putting a tree, because you already have one tree there, you have overhead lines, and you're right close to the property line.
Yeah, exactly. Those are all things that we would consider when trying to figure out if this would be a site or not. And you hit all of them. Even this little sneaky driveway over here, when we're looking at the site from a different perspective, there's, we're clear with this driveway with the white car, but if we walk down the road a little bit, the house next door has a driveway that's right nearby too. So yeah, the area that's right in between those two properties makes it not meet that criteria. There's another tree that's too close by, and then those wires overhead. They do run a bit low. Oh, these are wires below hand. Those wires might be still considerable, but we're thinking, if there's a mature tree, we want to be within 10 feet of clearance. So it could have been, if other sites were suitable, it's something that we could have recorded that wires are within X amount of feet. So no, this would not be considered a potential planting site. So we would carry on. Okay, so again, this picture we had seen before, so you might have an idea of what we would do with this site. But what are some things that we are noticing with this tree well? This would be a suitable location for another planting. Any guesses? Feel free to call them out or throw them in the chat box.
Looks like there's an overhang.
Yeah, Francisco said stump, Kanuku said the overhang. Yeah, the stump could be potentially removed. The overhang definitely not as easily removed as the stump. There's also these utilities on the ground here. So between the utilities and the overhang, this is not going to be a suitable potential planting site. They were good-hearted in trying to plant or include a tree well, but unfortunately with the rest of the infrastructure that was included in this area when it was built, it's not going to be suitable for another tree.
So I have another question about that
Sure.
exercise number 2.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at the left-hand photo, it looks like the tree well is like right in the middle of where somebody would open their door when they're parking. Is that something we take into consideration?
Yeah, that's a great point. Actually, I think somebody had brought up the first time we had gone through this training. From what I have been instructed, it is not something that would make or break it, but that might be something that the city may consider. But for our purposes and something that we would consider, if everything else was okay with the site and we were going to go ahead and map this, that would probably be something that I would record in the location information, just to like point out to DOF, like, hey, we noticed this. This could be an issue for potential parking. But if everything else was in alignment, then I would leave that up to them. But since that wasn't presented to us in a one of the criteria that we need, I would still, for our purposes, record it as a potential planting site if everything else was not present. Okay, so next up, we have this area. The orange cone is the area that we're looking at to consider planting a tree. So what are you thinking about this site here? This is a much bigger unimproved sidewalk. There are wires present and there is a driveway present. But with this rule out being a spot for a tree.
You would have to select your species carefully. So you have something that's growing more straight and taller before it starts spreading, rather than something that spreads fairly low, so that you avoid the wires.
Yeah, definitely.
And also, your cone is kind of like in center between the wall and the curb, is the ability to move it closer to the wall so that there's more space between the trunk and the lines. Because the place where I worked at, we had to have at least 10 feet between the trunk and the power lines, because otherwise it was too close and they'd come along and the the electrical company would come along and just kind of cut everything within 10 feet.
Yeah, definitely for safety, they do need to do that. That's why we see those trees pruned in all funky shapes. That's a good point. Another thing to consider, if the tree was planted closer to the wall, if it would be in conflict then with the wall, depending on the tree species that would be planted there. But since we're not selecting the tree species, there's a lot of room for possibility for what you potentially could put there. I saw Runa had thrown in conflict with the power line. So that's an awesome observation. In this particular case, because of the height of the power lines being greater than 10 feet, they are actually within a clearance. And because of the distance with the driveway, there's enough space for visibility here. So these are things that, if you're looking at that guide, how far do we have to be from a driveway? That would all be considered in this space. So something to think, like starting to look for clues when we're coming up to sites, like where this is a lot of green space, to be able to like move and manipulate where the cone is to see where we could potentially plant a tree. So, like right next to the driveway might not be a spot, but 25 feet down the block from the driveway, if that's the number I have to look up to see what exactly the number is, then that could be a potential planting site. And as long as the wires are out of the way, then we can consider that good too. And then two, taking a variety of different pictures, this is a good example of seeing the different perspectives of this area. So from straight on, you can see where the wires are, where the driveway is. From the side, you can see how far to the stop sign this tree would be. It's a pretty good distance, and as well, again, from the distance from the driveway. And then also from the other direction to the side, looking to see if there's any other driveways or any other types of utilities that could potentially be in the way. This looks all clear. So being able to capture all of that space in these pictures is going to be super helpful for DOF to see if we're within those criteria. So this is one that's good to go. Okay, so next up here, we are looking at this little green patch right in the middle of the picture. There's a couple of things going on here.
There's a sign.
There is a sign. Yes. Awesome. There also, there's a couple of things. So the sign, like Francisco said, underneath the sign is a gutter. So there are underground utilities here. And then right next to it is a driveway. So while there is a little bit of green space here, this is not going to be a site that's going to be suitable for a tree. Okay, so last one up here, we're looking at this space with the orange cone over on the side here. And what are some things that we're taking notice of?
It's kind of close to the intersection.
Okay, that is a good observation. This is a good observation for why we need multiple photos, because this is actually where this picture was taken. It's like a rounded corner, so it's not actually an intersection. But if it was, you're correct. It would be very close to the intersection. There are actually no wires here either, or driveways, so this would be considered a suitable planting site. All right, so we'll practice that a little bit more when we're out in the field. coming up to those sites, it definitely requires a lot of observation skills, looking to see what's around there. So looking for those signs, driveways, wires, utilities. The more we're seeing these things, the more we're going to be able to more easily pick them out. And I think working with a group of people is super helpful too, because we have more eyes looking out for these things. So once we have all our sites identified and be able to present them to the city, they'll be able to identify the possible trees that are going to be suited for that area. So like Kuniku was saying, in some areas are going to be more suitable for a particular species that's going to grow either higher or wider, depending on the site that's available. Something that DUF had mentioned in their webinar too, we had asked, do they have preferences of species that they put out? Because I think, we find doing a tree inventory, there are collections of species in certain areas that may have been favored during a certain time, but the answer was no, that they really do go into a lot of thought on selecting what types of species are put into certain areas, depending on the site requirements, which is, how trees should be planted into the ground. So we want to get the right tree in the right place there. They have their tree matrix that they use for selecting that tree, and also that the homeowner preference is taken into account whenever possible. But again, you have being the experts and knowing what tree species are going to be suitable is eventually what's going to have the final say in what trees get planted. All right, so before we hop into what's next, I wanted to show you the tree plotter. So we can play around in there quick. You can see kind of hands-on what it is we're looking through for practice. Okay, so let's see, time and key. Okay, so let's say we are mapping here and we find a potential planting site in front of this house here. So this does look a little bit different because can you all see tree plotter? I'm not sure if I'm sharing the right screen. Thumbs up, okay. There, okay. So it's a little bit different because I'm on my computer compared to the phone that we're going to be using when we're out in the field. But similar to how we would add trees, we would add our potential planting site. So I would go to add. This is where all our templates pop up. So we've refined them a little bit since those training graphics were included there. So we have trees, stumps, removed trees, dead trees, and proposed planting sites. These are the ones that we're going to want to include. The recently planted trees are not something that we're using actively, but another type of feature that we use when trees are actually getting put into the ground. So we can monitor, trees that are new, that need a little bit more caring, whether they have water bags or stakes. This is just another feature that we can use and change as the trees are getting a little bit more established. And then the streets without trees are those other features that citizen foresters don't have to worry so much about, as much as our team leaders. We use this to kind of plan our mappings and keep track of where we've been that for areas that don't have trees. So proposed planting site. We are going to set our template for that and mark our spot. Okay, so we'll have a primary ID number for this area. Our tree status is our proposed planting site there. There's nothing that we really need to include here because, again, we're not taking any measurements on a tree. This is just a space. But if I am evaluating a site, we are taking photos for every site. I would upload my photos from here. And then most of our information, again, gets put into our location information tab. This is our location status where we would pick if it's a small, medium, or a large site. Again, if it's 3 feet, it would be small, 4 feet, medium, and then greater than 5 would be large. And then we would be selecting our land use information. So same as it is usually with our tree inventory. Here's our beautiful corner option, which has been such a lifesaver. Median or park is another option that we can use too for those other non-residential area locations. Our growth space, these are all of our options. And this is where the site width and length comes in. So when we're taking those measurements either by paste or the 100-foot tape, we can, we'll do a 20 by 40 site. And then the site comments is where we could put in any information about the approximated height of the wires. And then, so if we had the rangefinder in as part of our equipment, we could either use this on the horizontal mode for collecting the site width if it's greater than 50 feet. And then also if you wanted to try to use it for height for the wires, that's another task that we could be using the hypsometer for. And then wires, present or conflicting and no conflict. In the site comments too, this would be where I would detail the height of the wires, if that's the number that we can measure. That way they can get some more information about what types of trees we can plant, or how high or how in conflict the wires might be. And that is it for tree plotter. So it's not quite as much information. A lot of this can be inputted right into the field while we're out in the field. But we do have data sheets for recording the site width as well. So back to this, we'll be practicing in the field tomorrow in Kaimuki. If you can't make it tomorrow, don't worry. If you just wanted to get some background information about what we're looking for planting, potential planting sites, this is definitely some kind of information that you can bring into your group, whether we are actually mapping potential planting sites or not. I think when we're out in the field looking for trees, looking for these areas where trees could go, it's something that we can kind of do simultaneously for maybe our newer groups that are just getting started. So good information to just have on hand when we're out mapping our trees. But yeah, if for people watching the recording, I think, Francisco is awesome as a team leader and happy to welcome anybody who is coming along later and wants to participate. So we are set up for tomorrow morning for our regular mapping session at 8:30. We'll be meeting in Kaimuki at, correct me if I'm pronouncing this park wrong, is it Petrie Park?
Yep.
All right, cool. Good. So we can park on 21st Avenue. There's a set of stairs that kind of, I think we set as a meeting area by the tennis courts. And then we'll walk around that area and start looking for potential planting sites around there. So if you have any questions, I will be there tomorrow morning. Francisco, our fearless leader, will be there tomorrow morning. And yeah, we hope to see you guys there. If you do have questions, now would be the time to ask them. And yeah, thanks again for hopping on.